Welcome to the Boat Galley Podcast. I'm Lin Pardey, here with practical tips, some stories, and some how-tos for your cruising adventure.
This episode is sponsored by the Boat Galley Guide to Storing Food Without Refrigeration. Have truly great meals with fresh produce, meat, butter, cheese, eggs, and more, even if you don't have a refrigerator or it's tiny. This ebook is now on sale for just $7. Get an extra $1 off with the coupon code PODCAST.
Slow down, slow down. People often ask me what it feels like to be at sea. They ask me why I enjoy being out there so much. So I thought I'd share with you 4 short stories I once wrote talking about the moods of being on watch. Story number 1. The paddock oak came cracking down a few minutes before 5 a.m., the rending, whickering sound of heavy timber rocketing her from her sleep. I glanced over the top of the book I was reading to look at the compass, then around the horizon. Still on course, no ships in sight. I picked up the book to rejoin Henrietta as she heard a knock on the kitchen door. 8 pages later, I glanced up again. The mainsail in Genoa glowed fuchsia as the sun sank slowly to kiss the horizon. The warm following wind caressed the hairs that had struggled loose from my braids and made them tickle my cheeks, the same way the little white horses tried to tickle Seraffyn's transom. Our taffrail log hummed softly just behind me. I glanced to port, where 5 miles away the revolution-torn hills of Portugal were just starting to release the full moon. 3,000 miles to starboard, my family and friends were fighting the fears of inflation, unemployment, and mortgages. 15 feet from where I sat my watch, Larry was asleep, and he was sleeping secure in the knowledge that our boat was strong, and I was able to handle most emergencies. To port, the moon showed its pink, bald pate. To starboard, the sun shot its last rays through the clouds. Ahead lay adventure. Behind, our self-steering vane controlled an ever-unraveling, bubbling wake. I returned to Henrietta as the stormy night burst through her kitchen door. Story number 2. I was glad to come on watch when Larry called. It was warm. I needed only a light sweater and a pair of shorts. The velvet black sky twinkled with stars. A light breeze kept us whispering along about 3 knots, close-hauled. Cabo Blanco, 6 miles off and abaft our beam, flashed its light 2 times every 10 seconds. I leaned back against the boom gallows and listened to the sounds Larry made as he climbed into the bunk. 1 hour later, I heard a new sound. I thought it was a lone porpoise coming to investigate it. Regularly, I heard it blow, coming closer and closer from behind. Suddenly, the moonlight gleamed off an enormous black whale, 20 feet from our quarter. Seraffyn is 24 feet long. That whale looked twice our size. I ran to the companionway. "Larry, come up quickly," I whispered urgently. He emerged seconds later, rubbing his eyes. "My watch already?" "No, Larry, there's a whale. He's awfully close." "Why did you wake me for something as silly as—" "Oh, my God!" Larry exclaimed as that giant expanse of black flesh arched slowly, inexorably, out of the water, 10 feet away from our beam. "Lin, turn on the radio real loud," Larry suggested. "Maybe the noise will drive him away." I did. We stamped on the deck and shouted. We blew the foghorn. But regularly, every 2 minutes, the whale surfaced beside us, saluting us with the overwhelming odor of his rotten breath. "We'll come about," Larry said as he unclutched the wind vane. "Maybe he'll just keep going." We settled Seraffyn on the other tack and headed dead away from the Costa Rican shore. I steered as Larry watched for our unwelcome companion. The sound of the whale's blowing told us our friend wasn't interested in us at all. He was headed south, no detours intended. As the sound of his blowing grew fainter, we tacked, and Larry set the wind vane for our original course. "I'm for a stiff drink. How about you? Then do you mind if I take the rest of my off watch?" Story number 3. Larry woke me gently. Your watch, Lin. We're becalmed again. I gotta fix off the lights on Berlinga and Peniche, but it's misted over now. I climbed reluctantly out of our warm sleeping bag. Larry handed me my shirt and gave me a hug, then disappeared into the forepeak. I pulled on my boots and jacket, set some water to boil, then went on deck. The huge blue and white drifter hung limply on its whisker pole. The last wind must have been blowing from aft. 2 days now we'd had these shifting, sporadic winds. With 15 miles to go, we had no wind and little visibility. I went below and poured a cup of tea. Then I opened the almanac to see when the sun would rise. 1 more hour to wait. I heard the foghorn of a ship passing nearby. I stood on deck and soon saw its lights as it came into view, about a mile away. Visibility wasn't too bad. I felt a light southerly breeze as I sat sipping my tea in the cockpit. Should I or shouldn't I debated, staring at the 16-foot whisker pole. I waited 5 minutes more. Then I started. Very quietly, I lowered the whisker pole topping lift. I unclipped the pole and slid it carefully along the deck. I dropped the drifter and stored it below. Finally, I stored the whisker pole on its brackets along the bowsprit. The sun just began to lighten the sky. Seraffyn began to trickle slowly through the water. I caught sight of the lights of Peniche and Berlinga and took bearings. Rushing below, I checked our position. We had a good margin of safety now in the 6-mile-wide channel. I went outside to make one last check before waking Larry. Your watch, Larry, I said, feeling a bit disappointed. We're becalmed again. I gotta fix up Berlinga and Peniche, but it's misted over now. And the last story? A very light kiss touched my cheek. Larry's smiling face caught my opening eyes. Hi, Bug. We're moving along. Really nice beam reach. As I crawled into my sweater, Larry poured me a glass of rum. Remember what Pedro said when we left El Capitan? Get south of Cabo San Vicente before November and you'll miss winter. From the look of things, he sure seems right. I pulled on my favorite yellow sea boots, not because it looked wet on deck, but because they kept my feet so cuddly. Larry snuggled into the still warm sleeping bag. I glanced around deck. No ships in sight. Calm seas, sails pulling well. I went below and got the book I'd been reading on my first watch. Before I'd read a chapter, Seraffyn heeled sharply to a gust of wind. I went on deck and another gust heeled us till the scuppers ran with foam. Dropping the mainsail eased our heeling. I stayed on deck watching the Genoa pull us at over 5 knots. I strolled forward just ahead of a burst of spray. For some reason, that spray made my decision. I took 2 gaskets from the deck locker and then dropped the Genoa, controlling it with a downhaul Larry had rigged for occasions just like this. Then I eased out on the bowsprit and lashed the sail down. Resetting the mainsail got us moving, but wasn't quite enough canvas, so I pulled the staysail from its bag and up it went. The sound of the sheet winch must have wakened Larry. Why aren't you wearing wet weather gear? He growled at me from his sleeping bag. I cleated the staysail sheet and growled back at him, because there wasn't a drop of water on deck 2 minutes ago. Go back to sleep. I went below and dragged out my wet weather pants just in case. As soon as I'd struggled into them, I went on deck to see a flash of lightning to windward. Damn, I said to myself, better get that Genoa off the bowsprit. I banged my toe on the forehatch, then slid on my rear out the bowsprit, glad of my wet weather pants. I had most of the jib hanks off when I heard Larry's imperious shout, What the hell are you doing on the bowsprit at night alone without a safety harness? The boat's doing over 5 knots. Furiously, I yelled back at him, taking the bloody jib off the headstay, and I slithered back on deck with the unruly mass of Dacron. You'd better put a reef in the mainsail, Larry snarled as he ducked below just ahead of a good dollop of spray, and put your wet weather gear on now, damn it. I bagged the Genoa, eased the main halyard, ripping a nail off in that process, and pulled the reefing pennants. Nothing happened. I looked aloft. Nothing fouled up there. Then I went aft to get a flashlight. A fine mist of spray burst over Seraphyn's side, effectively wetting me down. I lit the light and found the reefing outhaul line staring happily up at me from where it had hooked itself around the cockpit locker latch. I cleared it and pulled the reef into the sail, sheeted it in, checked our course, then rushed below for my wet weather jacket. Back on deck, I started tying the reef points into the forward part of the mainsail, clinging to the boom with my chin and getting furious as our motion became worse. I had 4 reef points to go when I heard the ship's bell ring 6 times. 3 a.m. Larry's turn. Thank God. I called down to Larry as I came below, dripping salt water. I began stripping down, reciting the tale of my watch's woes. When I was down to socks, panties, and sweater, Larry slowly climbed out of the bunk. He smiled at my exasperation and said, "Sail changing sure helps your watch go fast, doesn't it?" Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe in your podcast app. And reviews are always appreciated.